Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Are you on the hunt for indie podcasts with a dark side, but you're not quite ready to commit to subscribing to a new pod? Why not wet your beak with Spotlight on Darkcast? Each week we drop a new episode from one of the many shows on the Darkcast Network. Here you'll find true crime, brew crime, petty crime, retro horror, classic horror, true horror, spree killers, thrill killers, serial killers, breakfast serial killers, true paranormal, histories, mysteries, frauds, cheats, swindlers, two-timers, double-timers, four-flushers, cryptids, cryptography, astrology, virology, pathology, epidemiology, and people that fuck around with Ouija boards. Explore Spotlight on Darkcast. It's like dozens of superlative indie podcasts in one weekly package, and it can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. Spotlight on Darkcast. Fuck around and find out.
Hey, this is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for children. It's a true crime show. I talk about murder, drugs, sex, rock and roll. Oh hell, who am I kidding? This show might not even be suitable for some adults either. I like to drop swear words, and some people are just not comfortable with that. And if you're one of those people, you've been warned. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors! You are listening to Beyond the Rainbow, true crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ, and I'm proudly partnered with Darkcast Network. If you get a minute, please check out my show notes, and I'll have a link to the Darkcast Network website. On the website, you can find a whole list of all the wonderful shows with our network. I did a thing. I started a Patreon, and I'm going to wait to properly thank my first two patrons next episode. Because I gotta be honest with you, something happened this episode. I had researched a case and I had it all written up and I was ready to record it today. And I went to look for it, and it seems my damn laptop crashed sometime during the night. And I didn't save it. I don't have that case for you, and I was really sad about it. So one of my pod besties, Sinister Steph, she came through for me, and she loaned me one of her episodes. Thank you, Steph. Without further ado, here is Sinister Steph with Sinister Story Hour and the murder of Nikki Kuhnhausen.
Hello everybody, you're listening to the Sinister Story Hour. We talk about crimes, cults, conspiracies, and all things sinister. If you enjoy the show, please like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sinister Story Hour and on Twitter at Sinister Hour. You can help support the show for as little as 99 cents per month. As always, thank you for listening, and let's jump in. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sinister Story Hour. My name is Steph and I'm your host. Tonight I have a brand new story for you, and I think you're going to like it. It's not necessarily a happy story, but the person that we're talking about was so full of life and just such a beautiful person that I felt like I absolutely had to do this story once I heard about her. So, my story tonight takes place in June 2019 in Vancouver, Washington, and it's about a girl named Nikki Kuhnhausen. Nikki was a very, very unique person, and she just looked so full of energy, so full of life. She was just such a really, really incredible young spirit. Nikki was born July 6th of 2001 in Vancouver. At the time that our story takes place, she was 17 years old, which I really connected to, having a son right around that same age. And it's just a lot of personal connections that I made, and the social media aspect of it, and it just seems like she just was a normal teenager. She's described as cheerful, caring, full of energy, and she's also described as knowing exactly who she wanted to be and who she was. And that, to me, stood out so much, because at the age of 17, I had absolutely no idea who I wanted to be and no idea who I was. And I was not free to be myself. And so that is just amazing that she always knew that. And it's even more of a big deal in this case because Nikki was transgender. She had actually been born a male. And as her mother describes, from a very young age, Nikki was just Nikki. She actually came out as transgender as young as 11 or 12. Nikki and her mother were extremely close, and her mom always supported her no matter what. And I think that's also something that just really stuck out to me, that her mom and her loved each other so much, and her mom just adored her so much. Nikki had huge goals. She had so much talent in makeup. If you look at her social media pictures, you can tell this girl is talented with makeup. She can do anything with makeup. And her biggest goal was to someday be a makeup artist for Nicki Minaj. So I'm telling you, she had huge goals, and she was going to get there. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that this girl was going to make it. She had absolutely aspired to do huge things, and even aspired to be on America's Next Top Model someday. Like I said, she had a huge presence on social media, just like pretty much every other teenager, but she really stood out. On June 6th of 2019, Nikki arrived home on that morning wearing a different coat that actually had belonged to a man, and she had a bottle of vodka. Now, she had arranged a date with a man that she met on Snapchat, and at the time, Nikki was living with a friend at her place in Vancouver. So her date ends up being with 27-year-old David Bognadov. When I first read that, 27 years old with a 17-year-old girl, huge warning flags absolutely happening, right? Well, it seems like Nikki once in a while would actually lie about her age on social media, and I don't think that's anything that's not typical of something that a lot of teenagers do, so it's not that I'm blaming her, but it does seem that she knew he was an older person and that she had maybe portrayed herself to be a little bit older. So I'm not positive if he actually knew she was 17. Unfortunately, Nikki would never return from that date with David, and she was last seen alive at 5 a.m. at another friend's house. Police, of course, start with her friends. She had a lot of friends. They attempt to locate the last person who saw her, and they all pretty much point them in the direction of David. They knew that he was an older Russian guy. They were able to pinpoint who it was, and they did find David. And we'll get into that more in just a little bit. Nikki's mother, Lisa, describes the feeling she had immediately, and wanting to remain hopeful, but just having this gut feeling that something bad had happened. Honestly, how would you not think that? We live in a country where it's over 4 times more likely for a transgender person to experience violent victimization, including rape, sexual assault, or any other assault. So I don't think this is out of the realm of being a reasonable person. I think that she absolutely knew that Nikki was at a higher risk for these things to happen. And Nikki's mother was waiting for some kind of news. They were searching, and she wasn't just remaining still. She really became an activist and an advocate during this time. She joined with a lot of LGBTQ plus communities in addition to attending vigils, handing out flyers, and just anything to really draw attention to the violence that affects all transgender people. And honestly, I admire that so much because there are certain groups of people in our country that are at a higher risk for violence, and that is absolutely one of them. Nikki's mom spent a lot of time speaking with other activists and parents of transgender children and just really getting to know their situations and sharing her own. I'm going to take a very quick break and then we will discuss more about David Bognadov.
I'm Edward October, creator-host of OctoberPod, and we're both listening to Beyond the Rainbow, Crimes of the LGBT on the Darkcast Network.
We're back. Let's get into it. So I left off and we were talking a little bit about Nikki's mom and what she was doing during the time that they were searching. Of course, the police had spoken with David. He was the last person to see Nikki, as we know, on their date that they scheduled through Snapchat. And she had been speaking with David quite a bit leading up to that, I think. They had all of these messages. They knew that pretty much that was the last person with Nikki that night. I think it's really important as we go through this to notice how many times David changes his story about what really happened. In a lot of these stories we see, the person starts out with one story and then it just kind of evolves, and that is no different in this story. At first, David says that he found out the truth about Nikki being transgender, and he made her exit the car. That he had found this out, said, "Please get out of my car." She had walked away from the car, and that's the last he had seen of her. So this sounds pretty innocent, that he finds out the truth, he feels like he's being lied to, he makes her get out, and she goes on her way. I don't think that's the full story, and I think that we all know that's not the full story. Unfortunately, it would be a long 6 months of searching and trying to find answers until her remains were discovered, and they were actually discovered by a hiker in a remote wooded area outside of Vancouver, Washington. It's a place called Larch Mountain. Along with the remains, there were other items such as Nikki's rings, and like I said, Nikki had a huge social media presence. She had a ton of pictures online. So investigators were able to match the images on her profiles to the items that were actually found. They found a jacket, and they matched that from a picture of Nikki, and they matched rings to rings that she was wearing in the picture. So it was relatively easy due to her huge social media presence. Along with those items, police found a cord with pieces of hair extensions that were stuck in a knot. It made it very easy for them to narrow down that this cord was the actual murder weapon. He had been strangled with it. They also found a hyoid bone that was tangled up in the hair extensions. And for my fellow true crimers, you probably see the significance in that, right? That initially led police to believe that Nikki had been strangled with her hair extensions, or at least that they were inside of the item that was used. A probable cause statement alleges that David became enraged after discovering he had engaged in sexual contact with a biological male, whom he believed to be female at the time, and had subsequently strangled Nikki to death. With the finding of forensic evidence, police go back to David immediately for more questioning. He basically kind of changes his story. They're confronting him with a ton of evidence. They now have items that have been found of Nikki's. They now have her remains, and they actually have cell phone records that place his phone on Larch Mountain on the morning of Nikki's disappearance. So at some point, he tells them that yes, he had been with Nikki Kuhnhausen, and he had found out that she was transgender. He felt shocked, uncomfortable, and really, really disturbed. So at that point, David is arrested and charged with murder, and his story would change yet again. So by the time he stood trial, David actually admits to killing Nikki, but claims that he did it in self-defense. He claimed that she reached for his gun once he rejected her, and that it was all her fault, that she had reached for the gun, he had rejected her because she was transgender, and he had panicked and he had to kill her. Back in the Matthew Shepard case as well, we talked about gay panic being used as a defense, and that's basically what was happening here. He panicked when he found out that Nikki was transgender. He didn't really know how else to handle it. He testified that he would have been humiliated if his family learned that he had had sex with somebody who was transgender. And I'm going to insert my opinion really quick here, but the gay panic defense, in my opinion, should have never been allowed to be used in one case, let alone multiple cases. And the fact that he feels like his family would have been so humiliated that he had to then retaliate and murder somebody, and that was better, I can't even imagine. It's too much for me to fathom. David was found guilty of second-degree murder, as well as the second charge of malicious harassment under the state's hate crime statute. David was sentenced to 234 months in prison on the charge of the second-degree murder and 12 months more for malicious harassment. David was given the opportunity to speak in court, but he declined. At that point, he could have apologized to Nikki's family, and he chose not to. He chose not to speak at all. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of outraged people due to the fact that David was trying to use this trans panic defense. Honestly, I'm right there too. It enrages me as well. The whole idea that that's even an option, or that it even was an option at one time, outrages me. Nikki's mom really fought hard for Nikki's legacy, and it led to the passage of the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, which now blocks defendants from using a legal strategy known as the panic defense. Honestly, after this case, it really made me want to look it up, and courts in 39 American states actually still admit the gay panic defense. check into your own state and see if this is an option in your own state for people to be using this against people. I think that's the first step to creating a safer environment. It seems like a pretty small step to take. So one thing that I can't help but think on this gay panic defense or the LGBTQ plus panic defense is that it makes it the victim's fault. Simply by being who she was, they're making it somehow Nikki's fault. And that's completely wrong in my opinion. There's never any excuse for any of these things to happen to the victim. It is always about the perpetrator. And so it's really, really important for me to convey that. And honestly, my heart goes out to this family for everything that this mom has had to endure. So that is the end of my story. A very quick one because there wasn't a lot to be researched and found on this case. I am going to end this story about Nikki with this. Taylor Watts, a longtime friend of Nikki's, told People last year, quote, "She inspired a lot of people to actually feel free to come out as who they want to be," end quote. In the article on CBS News, they quoted Taylor saying, quote, "I want her just remembered as Nikki. Loving, caring, sweet, happy, funny. She'd make all of you laugh," end quote. So if there's anything that we can remember about Nikki, it's those things. That she was caring, sweet, happy, funny, and I wish that I could have met her. For our spotlight tonight, I do have a few other people that have actually lost their lives due to transgender and gender non-conforming people being at a higher risk. As of the time that I wrote this article, there were already 51 people that had actually been killed this year. 44 fatalities happened against transgender and gender non-conforming people in 2021. It's probably underreported, and there are probably more. Also, it is worth noting that African Americans and Latinos in this country are more likely to be victims of violent attacks against transgender people. And I'm reading these stories exactly how they are written on the website, so please go take a look. There are so many more. I will put this website in my show notes. It's on www.hrc.org. The first one is Kier Laprie Cartier, a 21-year-old black transgender woman, was fatally shot in Arlington, Texas on September 30th, 2021. Cartier was from Dallas, Texas, and graduated from Skyline High School. Her friends remembered her on social media as a, quote, "very strong, independent person who always had my back through thick and thin," end quote. Mel Groves, a 25-year-old black trans man, was fatally shot on October 11th, 2021 in Jackson, Mississippi. Groves was a plant soil scientist at Alcorn State University who loved agriculture and animals. Groves was also an active member of the Knights and Orchids Society, a Southern-centered grassroots startup founded and led by Black, queer, transgender, and gender non-conforming people supporting gender justice and LGBTQ visibility. And our last one is Samuel Edmund Damian Valentin, a transgender man who was killed January 9th in Trujillo Alto, Puerto Rico. Samuel was looking forward to starting a new year. On January 1st, he posted on his Facebook, "A new year to come. Grateful for all the experiences who taught me how strong we really are, to life, to good and bad, and for all justice that is forth to come." He also spoke out against violence in Puerto Rico, expressing his hope for a Puerto Rico without killings. Those are only 3 people who lost their lives, and they were transgender, and they had so much ahead of them. Please go check out that website, hrc.org. And until then, please stay safe and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I'll see you very soon. Bye, everybody.